Chapter 9, Preparing a Speech. So when it comes to preparing your first presentations, there's a few things that you need to keep in mind, and one of that is your audience. Audience analysis is when you look at and break down the composition of your audience. And so we're going to talk about why would you do that. So it's key for a speaker to achieve your goals. One thing you look at are demographics. Those are broad sociocultural categories such as age, gender, race, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, education level, religion, ethnicity, and nationality that are used to segment a larger population. Psychological audience analysis considers your audience's psychological dispositions toward the topic, toward the speaker, and the occasion, and their attitudes, beliefs, and values inform those dispositions. So it kind of lets you know what you should do as far as a topic goes. So think about why should you consider your audience. One of our goals as a speaker is to provide information that's beneficial to our audience. So having some background demographic information lets us know things that might be beneficial for them to hear. For example, if you're giving a speech in a college public speaking class, there are a lot of things that are relevant to every member of your classroom, such as financial aid, ways to pay for college, stress management, study skills, careers that are popular and growing and something people might want to look into. I mean, those are things that apply to every member of your class. Beyond that, think about sometimes the differences within a classroom if you're giving a speech. Think about the fact that at the community college level especially, sometimes there's quite the range of ages. You have people that have never entered the workforce and are right out of high school versus people that have been working for years or even decades and have decided to return to college. So there could be some very differing experience levels there. You also have vast differences with the ethnicities, very diverse classrooms. So it's important to have an idea of what topic applies to all of your audience as much as possible. You also want to have an idea of what their beliefs are. So there's sometimes that you're walking into an audience and you know they believe what you believe. You know, for example, if you're asked to speak at a National Rifle Association rally, you know what everybody in that room believes about one topic at least. So you know if you talk about gun rights and things like that, they're all going to support what you say. Whereas sometimes if you're called to speak at a different event where it's not a specific club or a specific organization, their desires, their interests are going to be very different. So it helps to know what they believe. You kind of approach things differently if you don't know if an audience agrees with you. You approach things differently, in fact, if you know they adamantly disagree with you. So it is important to have an idea of what your audience talks about. Other than that, you want to make sure that your audience believes that you're credible to speak about what you're speaking about. So you want to make sure that they see you as competent, trustworthy, and engaging. So consider the different types of audiences that you have. You have a captive audience. Those are people who are required to attend your presentation. So they're not people that volunteered to attend your presentation, but they're required to. So think about that in the classroom setting. I've had situations where students spoke on topics that were pretty controversial. And the way that they approached it was pretty offensive to some members of our audience. Years ago, I had a few veterans in my audience, and it was not, and all of these young men had joined the military after 9/11, and that's when they began their military service. It was years later. They were out of the military. They had talked a lot about their experience in the military, and then I had a student that same class that gave a speech on why she felt the events of 9/11 were fake and there was a conspiracy. And so for the young men that had devoted many years of their lives to the military because of that event, that was pretty offensive, and they got up and they walked out of the presentation. So you have to kind of sometimes, you're always welcome to your opinions, but always consider that it may not be a situation where your audience asks to be be there. So be thoughtful of who your audience is in those situations. Then you have voluntary audiences where they know what you're talking about and they volunteered to come and hear, and they decided that they wanted to hear you speak on that topic. And there's situational audience analysis that considers the physical surroundings and the settings of a speech. So when you begin the speech process, you determine your purpose, and that's assigned in this class. So you're going to either inform or persuade or entertain. And once you know your purpose, then you choose your topic. So think about how to choose your topic. I always encourage you to brainstorm. Brainstorm topics that you are familiar with, that you're interested in, and are currently topics of discussion. So again, you want to think about relevance with your audiences. So if it's a current topic, that would make it relevant. You always want to talk about things that you're interested in yourself, that you're familiar with, that you're knowledgeable about. If you have high levels of communication anxiety when it comes to the public speaking experience, then it's super important that you choose a topic that you are comfortable with, that if someone were to ask you about it on the spot any day, you have a wealth of information to provide them. And if you choose something that you're really comfortable with, that's going to help reduce that anxiety, because you may be nervous about speaking in front of people, but man, you know your topic. So that's important to consider. Always consider a topic that's appropriate for the assignment and the occasion. Some students, I always encourage you to work smart, not hard. So I will always encourage students, if you have a topic that can be made from your informative to your persuasive, I think that's awesome, but you need to be careful with that. So sometimes I've had students that I've had a lot of parents through the years in my classes, and they have students they have their own children with ADHD, and they want to tell us about ADHD. And then for the persuasive topic, that would be the informative topic, is what is ADHD? And the persuasive topic, I've had parents that say, I've put my child in a specific therapy, I have put my child on a specific diet, that my child takes these supplements, and so they persuade us on why they believe this path of treatment for ADHD is the most effective. So you can take ADHD to basic information, to this I believe is the best treatment for ADHD in children. On top of that, if you have a president that you liked, you could talk about informative speech. This is tell us about the person. And then persuasive speech, this is why I think this is the best president in history. But then I've had students kind of try to take topics like abortion and take them from informative to persuasive. And that doesn't work very well. It's very hard for people that are passionate on either sides of that topic to give plain information without sharing their opinion. It's always biased. So if you do want to take a topic from informative to persuasive to save yourself some time and you're not sure how to do that, just reach out to me and I'll do my best to help you. And I want to make sure that you choose a topic that can be done well with. But choose a topic that's appropriate for the assignment. Choose a topic that you can make relevant to your audience, that you can tell your audience, this is why I've chosen this topic and I think it can benefit you in these ways. And choose a topic that you have the resources to research. I've had lots of students that say, I want to talk about this, I just can't find the information. And if the information isn't out there, then you might want to choose another topic. You'll have a specific purpose, and the specific purpose and the thesis statement are kind of the same thing. So let's look at that. The specific purpose is a one-sentence statement that includes the objective you want to accomplish in your speech. The thesis statement is a one-sentence summary of the central idea of your speech that you either explain or defend. So your thesis statement you will incorporate into your presentation. In that thesis statement, I need to know what you're talking about, and if it's a persuasive speech, I need to know what your viewpoint is. So for example, in the sample outline for the informative speech, I talked about migraines. So your thesis statement is simply a sentence. As we continue today, I'm going to tell you about migraines. If it's a persuasive speech, for example, the keys to being a successful college student is the persuasive speech I provided as an example. And that's one of those that's kind of hard to, you have to be very specific on how you make it a persuasive speech, but I would say, as I continue today, I'm going to tell you about the 3 things I believe are most important to becoming a successful college student. By the time I finish today, I hope I encourage you to either continue these behaviors that leads to success or to implement them in your daily lives. So, but you know my belief in that persuasive statement. So, researching your support material. To research, you guys know, and I know most of you will do exactly what I would do, which is get on the internet, and that's perfectly fine. You also can go to the library. You can look at periodicals, which basically tell you a specific volume of a journal that talks about a topic that you may need. You can look at newspapers and books, search engines, reference tools. You can interview people, and then, of course, websites. You can use examples, explanations, statistics, analogies, testimonies, and visual aids as your support material. So visual aids help a speaker reinforce speech content visually, which helps amplify the speaker's message. So think of a visual aid. A lot of us think about the type of learner you are, where some of us hear things, we get it, we're good. Some of us see things, we understand it, we're good. But others of us takes hearing and seeing and sometimes doing to really understand a concept. So a visual aid helps you break down complicated information into a visual format that really reinforces that message for your audience. It helps your audience remember the information. It helps them understand the information. It helps them see something in action by demonstrating it, and it engages them. It kind of brings them in the audience. It adds interest and is a little more captivating for your audience. You could use objects, chalkboards, whiteboards, flip charts, posters and handouts, pictures, diagrams and drawings, charts and tables, graphs, video, presentation software. For this class, you're required to use a PowerPoint or Prezi or slideshow to incorporate into your informative and persuasive speeches. So tips for using PowerPoint as a visual aid. Don't have more than 2 slides per main point. Use consistent theme with limited variation in font, style, and size. Incorporate text and relevant graphics into each slide. No more than 6 lines of text or bullet points. Don't use complete sentences. Be very clear and concise. Remember, as you're talking and going through your speech, your audience doesn't have a ton of time to read. Sometimes I'll see students that clearly have copied and pasted a paragraph from the internet onto a slide, but it doesn't do the audience a lot of good because they go right over it really quickly, and it's very difficult for them to see it, and it's difficult to read. Don't add animations or anything like that distract from the slide transitions. It can do lots of cool things, but that doesn't necessarily mean we need it. Have a slide displayed when it is have a blank slide displayed when it is irrelevant to what you're discussing. So if you, for instance, have some graphs and charts, but you're not talking about them back to back, then put in a blank slide in the middle. That way your audience isn't focused on something that you're not talking about. Organizing your information. Each main point will have a central idea and meet some part of your specific purpose. Typically, you'll have 3 main points in your presentations for this course. You can use parallel wording, which is wording among key organizing signposts and main ideas that really help structure the speech and make things flow easily. So there's a few different organizational patterns you can use. For an informative speech, you could use a topical, chronological, or spatial. Topical is probably what you're going to use most often. And that basically means you're organizing your main points into basically a way that makes sense. It flows. It's logical. So there's a couple of different examples. So I would talk about the sample outline that I have for migraines. And your main points are what are the causes of migraines, what are the types, and then what are the treatments. So you would talk about, how do we get them, what are the various kinds that we get, and how do we fix them. So that would be a logical way to organize them. Primacy effect is you have your best information in the beginning to make a positive impression, and then recency effect is that your audience will remember the information they heard most recently toward the end. One thing I would say is typically your middle point may be where your audience zones out a little bit. Chronological pattern helps you structure your speech based on time or sequence. So if you're going to do a speech on someone's life, you might choose that pattern. You would also, if you were going to do a how-to or demonstration speech. Spatial pattern is based on proximity. So you won't use this pattern in this course, I wouldn't think. But if you were, for instance, in a career in marketing and you're going to talk about sales success in various branches of a business, you might do that spatially, geographically, based on the location of the business. And then for persuasive presentations, you might use a problem solution. In this type, you would say a problem, and then you would offer a solution and persuade why it's the best solution. You also might do a cause and effect. You would set up relationship between ideas that shows a progression from origin to result. So this is the cause of a problem, and these are the effects. Monroe's motivated sequence, I think, is what you use most often without realizing it if you're persuading someone. I also believe that this method is what we see a lot in commercials or advertisements. So with this method, you get the attention of your audience, you establish a need, you satisfy that need, you have them visualize life after that's been corrected, and then you tell them what to do to take action. I usually use the example of like a proactive commercial. It really goes right through the steps of this process. So the attention, a lot of times they'll use a celebrity, or they might use someone that has a really severe case of acne that gets your attention. And then they establish a need. So then they'll say something. Do you ever have breakouts you can't get rid of? Or do you have the scars of breakouts? And everybody's like, yeah, I do. Or they'll even say, do you wish your skin was clearer? And you're like, of course I do. So then they'll say, if you use proactive, then this regime, then you can get clear skin and it'll clear up your breakouts. And then they show you pictures, visualizations of before and afters, and you're like, man, if they look that awesome, I could too. And then at the very end, they say, in order to have beautiful, clear skin, order these products. That's your action. So a lot of our persuasive presentations fall into this category. So incorporating support material. Conduct background research to learn how a topic is broken down. Conduct focused research guided by your thesis and purpose. Write a central idea statement based on themes found in your research. Choose an organizational pattern based on that and incorporate the support material into your main points and subpoints. I always think it's most beneficial before you begin your research to develop what you believe you want your main points to be. So I think that really helps have more focused research. For example, if you wanted to talk about financial aid in college and how to get resources, you Google that, you're going to have a ton of information. But if you Google unsubsidized loans, you're going to get the specific information that you need. So I think it's always better to have your main points and then let that drive your research so that you're not deciphering through a bunch of information that isn't beneficial to your search. So citing sources. All sources must be cited using works cited page or bibliography. You'll be assigned a citation format to use for all of your assignments. In this course, we're going to use the APA, the most recent APA format. In your speech, it's very important to let your audience know where you're going. This is something I find that I get a lot of pushback from a lot of students. They feel like this is too simplified, that it's unnecessary, but I can tell you, as someone that's listened to about 1 billion speeches over the past 19 years, it's so helpful when you clearly lay out to your audience what you're doing and where you're going. So I would say simple things like, let's use my migraine sample speech as an example. To begin, I will tell you about the causes of migraines. And then as I go through that point, I go to my second point. Now that we have discussed causes, let's take a look at types of migraines. And then when you get to your third point, you would say, now that we've discussed causes and types, lastly, let's look at treatment options for migraines. So when you do things like that, your audience knows exactly where you've been and where you're going in your speech. Introductions. The introduction has a few functions. The first function is to get the audience's attention. The second is to establish credibility. Third is to clearly state your thesis, and the fourth is to preview your main points. Sometimes 3 and 4 fall into one sentence. So let's start with getting the audience's attention, and we're going to talk about different attention devices in a moment. Another thing I have some pushback through the years is that students want to begin with their thesis statement. But that's not interesting. You want to start with your attention getter. You want to use some sort of attention device that pulls in the audience so that they are interested in your topic. They can in some way feel the impact of your topic, and then they can relate to it. So I think in the migraine speech, I kind of list some descriptions of what it feels like. And I have a visual of an image that kind of lays out how people feel when they have a migraine. So it talks about feeling like a knife is going through your eye, feeling like a lightning bolt is going through your head. And you have like a animated descriptive introduction that lets people know what that pain is like. Then you establish credibility. And then I would say, as someone that has suffered from migraines for over 25 years, I know what it feels like to have that pain on at least a weekly basis. As I continue today, you get to your thesis, as I continue today, I'm going to tell you about migraines. We will look at the causes, the types, and the treatments. So you get the attention of your audience. You establish your credibility. And that can go in either order if you choose. That you can kind of change that up. But you tell why you chose that topic. If it's something that you've struggled with, is it somebody you've been fascinated with and read a lot of books on? Is it something that has impacted your life in some way? Tell us why we should listen to you. And then clearly state your thesis and preview your main points. So, attention devices. There's a couple of different ways that you can get the attention of your audience. First, you could use humor. So, humor is not appropriate for all speeches. It's not appropriate for all topics. But it is a way that you can get the audience's attention if it is appropriate. What I would say is make sure it's appropriate for your topic. Make sure it's an appropriate humor in general, especially for your audience. And then I'd make sure it's funny. Just because you think it's funny or just because I think it's funny doesn't mean others will. I've found that many times as a teacher. So it's always important to test it out on various people to make sure you're not the only one that thinks it's funny. If you're in front of an audience and you begin with a joke that you think is hilarious, but nobody else does, that's a good way to kind of sink that confidence that we don't want to do. So humor is a way. Citing a startling fact or statistic. I think this is a great way to begin your speech, especially if you're persuading. You really want to show someone the impact of a problem that you're trying to tell them about. Give them some statistics that are just kind of in your face. You'll never believe what a big problem this is or how many people it impacts. You can use a quote. We quote people because, number one, they're experts or they're famous in some way. They may be a historical figure, a scientist, a medical professional. We also quote people because they say things in beautiful ways that we can't come up with. For instance, if I were going to give a presentation on volunteering, I would start with, John F. Kennedy once said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but for what you can do for your country." As I continue today, I want to tell you about the importance of volunteering. We will look at the importance of serving your communities and your country. So you would take a beautiful quote and begin. It's very simple. You could ask a question to your audience. You can tell a story or create some sort of image, tell a personal experience or a rhetorical question. So I would say with a question, either way, you don't want an answer back. It's never productive to wait for answers from the audience members, I don't believe. I think that can get you off track pretty quickly. Personal experiences and stories, that brings in the audience. That explains things to the audience. It makes things real for them. It's interesting to them. And it's it's a great way to begin a speech. Your conclusion, in the conclusion of your speech, you cue conclusion. You always say something like, to conclude, in conclusion, as we wrap things up today. This is known as the break light function because it alerts your audience that you're about to stop. I don't ever think about when you've watched a movie and you've really devoted yourself to this movie and then it just ends. And you're like, wait a minute. I don't feel like you wrapped up anything for me. I feel like that was very abrupt and I wasn't ready for it. And we feel the same way if you just stop and we don't realize that you're about to stop your speech. So the conclusion, letting your audience know that you're about to conclude. In conclusion, and again, the first and second points may come together here. In conclusion, today we have discussed migraines. We have looked at the causes, the types, and the treatment options for migraines. And then you provide a clear ending. So the clear ending can refer to the attention getter. You can say, just like the quote that I used in the beginning, think about this. Or if you told a story, you reference the story. Some speakers can begin a story in the introduction and then end it in the ending, and that's a great way to do it. But provide some sort of clear ending so that your audience knows you're finished. If it's a persuasive speech, that ending may be a call to action. If you've done a persuasive speech on voting, your last statement be, I challenge you that your next local and national elections, that you get out and you vote and you make your voice count in our democracy. So you might have a call to action for your audience. Think about this. The way you begin your speech is crucial. If you don't get your audience's attention in the beginning, you're probably not going to get it again. And the way you end your speech is crucial because that's the last thing you're leaving them with. So it's very important that you are thoughtful when you develop both of those things. So a formal outline is a full sentence outline that helps you prepare your speech. It includes the introduction, conclusion, and the body of your speech. We are doing outlines for this course for each of your presentations, and I provided a sample outline in your notes in Canvas so that you do know the process for that. Principles of outlining your consistency, unity, coherence, and emphasis. So this is the outline format we're going to use in this class. So I do, actually this should be it is a lowercase I, it just doesn't look that way. You have your Roman numerals that are your main points. You have your capital letters that are your subpoints. You have your numbers, Arabic numerals for your details, lowercase numbers for your specific details, and lowercase Roman numerals for more specific details. So there are rules for outlining. You coordinate points. If you have a 1, you must have a 2. If you have an A, you have to have a B. If you can put 3s, C's, D's, add them at however you need them, but do know you have to have at least 2. If you have 1, you have to have 2. All right, I hope this gives you a good idea of the starting point of developing your speeches, the organization, and outlining.